Good evening and welcome to Chicago Public Library. I'm Sharon Wyatt with the Civic, Cultural, and Literary Engagement Team in the Adult Service Department. And on behalf of everyone at Chicago Public Library, welcome. We want to especially welcome you to Chicago Public Library throughout 2023 as we celebrate our 150th anniversary year with a variety of events, celebrations, partnerships, and digital content for all ages throughout the year. For more information on everything we have planned, visit www.chipublib.org/150 throughout the year. So before we begin, please silence your phones. This event is being live streamed on CPL's YouTube and Facebook channels and will be available for on-demand viewing immediately following the event. After the conversation, our guests will take questions from the audience from those lined up at the microphone in front of the stage only. Virtual viewers, please put your questions on the chat. I also want to thank the Chicago Public Library staff who worked to make this event possible, and our bookstore partner, Sandmeyer's. Books are available for purchase in the lobby, and our guest author will sign books after the program. Tonight, Chicago Public Library is pleased to welcome Pemon Rami, author of When Blackness Was Golden, Observations from the Front Line. This event is part of our Voices for Justice series and celebration of Black History Month. When Blackness Was Golden highlights influential eras of Black history, and Mr. Rami shares a coming-of-age story as a young man growing up in Chicago, his involvement in the civil rights movement, the student movement, the Black arts movement, and the Black theater and film movements. Pemon is a veteran international filmmaker, lifelong cultural advocate, and former director of education at the DuSable Museum of African American History. He is also Chicago's first African American film casting director. Mr. Rami provided talent for numerous featured films, including The Blues Brothers, Mahogany, Cooley High, and The Spook Who Sat by the Door. He is an international film producer and director, a member of the board of Illinois Arts Council, a former member of Joseph Jefferson Theater Awards Committee, a former National Endowment for the Arts Program Evaluator, and a member of the Luminary Board of the Independent Film Alliance. Amongst his numerous awards, he's received the 2017 Visionary Award from the Pan-African Film Festival in Los Angeles, the country's most prominent Black film festival. His film, 93 Days, covering the Ebola virus in Nigeria and starring Danny Glover, garnered him a nomination for the African Academy Award and African People's Choice Award. Tonight, Pemon will be interviewed by radio, TV, and special event producer Sylvia Ewing. Sylvia Ewing is a director at the nonprofit organization Elevate Energy. She has worked on both sides of the microphone, helping nonprofits communicate effectively, implement strategic plans, manage change, and produce events. She is an award-winning journalist and a broadcast veteran. Sylvia has built a career as a popular moderator, producer, and meditation coach, reaching thousands each year. Let's welcome Pemon and Sylvia to the CPL stage.
We're delighted that you're here. I'm tired hearing all the things that he has done, but you are going to be so inspired when you get to know him a little better. And if you are here because you're already a fan, your thoughts will be validated once again. So I'm going to dive right in. The way we're going to do this is we're going to talk a little bit, and then we're going to come to you for some questions. And as was mentioned earlier, there'll be an opportunity to have your book signed. Does that sound okay? Good, good. And we see some friends in the audience and family. Hey, everyone, and hey to the folks at home. So, Pemon, I'm excited because I was blessed to be with you at the start of this journey when you were at the Woodson Library for your book launch. It's been out. It'll be a year this spring. Since that time, what have you learned, and what's the journey been with your book so far when you're out in the community?
Well, first of all, I thank you, not only for being here today, but also for helping us to launch it. You were one of the first people that we met when we came back to Chicago and got involved with, and so we have always appreciated this relationship. But but I'll get to your question. But I first of all want to thank the Chicago Public Library for having me here. This is indeed an honor. To be in the Harold Washington Library is an honor. To be sitting in a city that was founded by Jean-Baptiste Pointe-du-Sable is an honor. And to be a part of the continuation of the effort to tell the stories that are necessary for us to continue to understand who we are, what we are, and to encourage young people to continue to work towards the restoration of the African mind and us as a people. So I appreciate the fact that I've been able to be here. What have I learned? So doing a book is different. You know, for those of you that know my background, you know that I've done film, television, multimedia, technology, design, and radio. But being an author is a different world. And so falling into that and being able to find the ability to document some things that I was able to be privy to was extremely important. But today was the first time in my life that I have read online someone quoting from a book that I wrote. And so today this woman said, I read in When Blackness Was Golden by Pemon Rami that Jackie Robinson got a job and we lost an industry. That's a direct quote, and it's very, very true. Jackie Robinson, for those of you that don't know, was the first player in the Negro Leagues that was accepted by the Brooklyn Dodgers at that time. And he got a job. And so the majority of black people, they used to go to black ballparks. There was a black ballpark here on 39th Street, and where the Dan Ryan is. It was one of the first black-owned ballparks. For people to be excited about Jackie Robinson meant that they wanted to go to the major leagues, and they wanted to go to the major ballparks. And even though there was levels of discrimination, and you had to sit in certain places, and it still was something that people wanted to support this man's ability to break through barriers. But in the process, all of those players that were playing for the Negro Leagues, all of those businesses that were making the bats and the uniforms, all of those restaurants that were outside of those stadiums that used to feed that community, they all lost. So that's one of the things. The fact that people actually read what you say and remember something from it. But more importantly, I realized how disconnected from our history we are. Even to the extent that sometimes we don't even see ourselves within ourselves. And what I mean by that is we're critical of some things that black people do when in fact we do them, and if we do and we are black, that means that black people do. So if you separate yourself, and if you say, well, you know, black people will never do that, but you go out every day and you support black businesses, then how can you make that statement? We have to stop being as general and be more specific to recognizing the good things that we do. And there are a lot of those.
Well, thank you for that. And there's so many connections. At some point, I told you I wanted to just let the book fall open on a couple of spots and ask you the first thing that comes to mind. But I'd like you to follow up a little bit on, you touched on baseball. Baseball was important to you as a young man, wasn't it?
It was. You know, my father played for the Negro Leagues. And so I grew up playing baseball. It was a major part of our young lives. And one of the things that happens with baseball, for those of you that don't know, is to organize a baseball team, you have to have 9 people on both teams. So that means 18 people that you need to play a game. And so what you had when I was young was these men that would go around and they would organize these kids and they would pull them together and they would buy the uniforms and they would help them to buy gloves and all of that went away. But it was a predominant part of our growth. It was also the reason for my first experience with racism. In 1959, the White Sox were playing for the pennant. And our Little League team went to the baseball field, which was Comiskey Park on 35th Street, to see the game. We were out, we wore our little uniforms. We were happy little kids between 7 and 9 years old. After the game, we went out the wrong door. And what the wrong door meant was on the back end of the park was Bridgeport, where the original Daly lived. And we walked out, and there was a little park, and we were throwing the balls while we were waiting for my father to get the car. And we were attacked by the community. They came out with bats and bricks and calling us names and throwing us things at us and ran us from the back of the ballpark all the way across the Dan Ryan until we back in the safety of Stateway Gardens. And as a young child, you know, you don't know why that happens. Mm-hmm. You know, like, what is it that we did that was so bad that would cause that? But baseball also taught me, gave me an understanding of teamwork. And when you play baseball, you realize that you play a position. You back other people up, but your responsibility is clear. And I've been able to utilize that philosophy in business throughout my life.
You've utilized it in business, you've utilized it with a partner, you know, in your life. All of that has been profound. I love going from childhood baseball. What about when you became a student activist? Talk a little bit about that period and what led you to organize the student movement that you were a part of, and that you were really a leader in.
You know, one of the questions that all of us have to ask ourselves is, when is enough enough? And throughout our lives, we go through things, and we put up with a lot. And then you get to that point where you hit a wall and you say, I'm not dealing with this anymore. So growing up, and especially in school, I was kicked out of school a couple of times, suspended, because I challenged the history books that we were being taught from. And that was a big part of it. I also heard Martin Luther King speak when I was 16. And Martin Luther King came down to Stateway Gardens, and he spoke, and he said, we're going to march to Gates Park, and we're going to march to Cicero, and we're going to march to Marquette Park. And I said, I'm going home because you crazy. And as eloquent as he was, I realized how deadly that comment was that he had made. Because growing up in Chicago, you knew there were just certain communities that you didn't go into. And so that was a part of the driving factor that led me more towards the philosophy of Malcolm X than it did to the philosophy of nonviolence, because I, growing up in Stateway Gardens, couldn't see myself getting hit and not hit back. It just was not in my DNA to be able to do that. So, 1967, Owen Lawson was the first teacher in the Chicago Public Schools that was teaching history that was fired. And he was fired, you know, primarily because, you know, he was trying to let us know what we were about and what we should have been about. When he was fired, it drew a lot of the students to Inglewood High School to try to support those efforts. And that was my first introduction to the beginning of the student movement. And then, because I had a performing background and we were going around the city performing, I knew a lot of people at a lot of the schools. So we were able to call a meeting to organize all of the schools in the black community, and we ultimately organized a boycott where 35,000 young people walked out of school. And primarily it was to get black history in the schools, black teachers, black administrators, black businesses, better food, things like that. And we stood up to it, and a lot of those things were changed, because prior to that movement, you know, we had no black businesses that were allowed in CPS as vendors.
How old were you?
I was 17. Yeah, I'm 17.
You talked about we met when you came back to Chicago, and we were drawn together because of our passion around young people and being at the table with them, being mentors, but also learning from them. Why is that work so important, and why do you continue today to try to build bridges between generations?
In my book, I list 10 mentors that took me under their wing when I was young. Oscar Brown Jr., Keelan Phil Coran, Dr. Bobby Wright, Dr. Anderson Thompson, George Ward, Okoro Harold Johnson, who started ETA, my father, of course, Willie C. Myers, who was my wife's father. All of these men took me under their wing and and Ted Ward, I don't want to forget him, and Ted Ward, they allowed me to express myself without trying to demand for me to be a certain way. And because all of these mentors helped me, it just seemed that it was the right thing for me to do. And so with Maseko and I, who's my wife, for those of you that don't know, when we came back to Chicago, we decided that we would commit to 14 to 19-year-olds as I give back, that we would put together sort of a training program for that. And your granddaughter, today, she's bowing, she evoked a statement in me that I've never made before, but I am making this time. When you meet talent, when you meet young people, you have an option. You can either support them or you can exploit them. And the tendency a lot of times is to exploit the children rather than to get behind them and to encourage them. All of the young people that are here, and first of all, I want to thank the staff and class at Chicago State University that's tuned in tonight. All of you have the opportunity to make a difference. It only takes one person. And you just have to choose what is your contribution going to be. It doesn't always have to be political. It doesn't always have to be revolutionary. But it should be something that you're giving back to encourage other people around you to just be better, to make your community better. I gave a speech not too long ago, and I said that black people in the history of this country have never burnt up their communities during a riot. And people looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, but they haven't. They burnt up the communities in which we reside, but not which we own. Nobody burned up Chatham, Peel Hill, or unless they went to CPS and couldn't judge, when. And so sometimes the wind would catch something on fire that wasn't supposed to be. But in general, our strike back has been against being controlled and being taken advantage of. And whenever that changes, we become more protective than we do in terms of trying to change the way that trying to ignore the way that things should be. Because we shouldn't ignore it. We have to at some point step up and say, okay, I'm going to take the responsibility this day to make a difference. How many women were arrested for sitting on the bus before Rosa Parks? Anybody know? Do you know? There were 10. Look them up. There were 10 women that were locked up for the same reason. But once Rosa Parks sat down, it hit that moment where enough was enough. Mm-hmm. What caused it could have been the death of Emmett Till, which was earlier that year. It could have been something else.
And it could have also been their strategy from the NAACP and folks as well. So that strategic planning was a part of it. But if I may, I want to get to your art, but before we get to celebrities, you say greatness should not be determined by name recognition, but rather by contributions made and lives touched.
Yeah, too many times we pay homage to people that we just know their names. They could be singers, but make no contribution to the community. There was a period of time, and I made this comment on the radio not too long ago, during the Martin Luther King riots, when Martin Luther King was killed, part of the people that stopped that were DJs. Herb Kent and some of those folks got into a convertible, and they drove to the community, and they were able to stop some of the violence that was going on. The reason for that is because the community knew them. They were connected to the community. They were respected by the community. I don't know that we could name more than one or two people now that can even do that.
But we have a lot of famous people.
But we have a lot of famous people. And it's the same thing with athletes. You know, there was a time when athletes were revered, but now they're getting robbed, by people because they had no connection back to the community. A lot of them don't. Those that do are protected. You know, whenever you are serving the people that are around you, they will protect you. But if you look like somebody that is exploiting them or ignoring them, then you have no protection.
I'd like to talk a bit about your work in casting, work with films. What brought you to that business? I know that you were doing theater. Take us a little bit through your creative world, both starting in theater and moving into film.
Someone at one point referred to me as an opportunist. And my initial response to it was negative. But then when I thought about it again, I said, well, actually, I am and have taken advantage of every opportunity that has presented itself, a lot of which I had no idea that these things would happen. I got involved with theater because I saw a play by Oscar Brown Jr., Okoro Harold Johnson, and Keelan Phil Coran called Lyrics of Sunshine and Shadows. It was the work of Paul Laurence Dunbar, and they came to Wendell Phillips High School. They did the show. It was incredible. I looked at the show, and I said, that's what I want to do. However, what I'm saying to people is that had I seen a bad play that day, I would have been a furniture refinisher because that's what my father did, right? And so I started producing, and I started producing very, very young. I would get a job washing pots or washing dishes at a restaurant, and I would then take the money and rent a theater and buy all the costumes and get the actors together that would put on my shows. Sam Greenlee was aware of my work, as a lot of people in Chicago were, and he called me and said he was doing Spook Who Sat by the Door, and he had written a character for me, and he wanted me to play Shorty Duncan in the film. I do the film. We shoot here in Gary and in L.A. When I come back to town, a casting director named Shirley Hamilton called me and asked me would I. Shirley was she was the top. Shirley Hamilton called me and asked me would I be an extra in a film, and I said, extra? I just got back from California, starring in a movie. I'm not going to be an extra. And she said, I need you to do this. Would you please do it? And I said, fine. It was a movie with Isaac Hayes, and I'm standing on the corner. Isaac Hayes kept walking by, and he stopped and asked me, did he know me? And I said, well, no, I know you, but you don't. So as we were talking, he had seen an advanced screening of Spook Who Sat by the Door. He recognized me from that. We were both born in August, both Leos, and we became a little tight. When the film wrapped and it was over, a couple of months later, I got a call from American International Films that they were doing Cooley High, and I had been recommended by Isaac Hayes. Same thing for Mahogany. I got a call from Motown that Isaac Hayes had recommended me to do the casting, and also to do a part in that film. And so it came about as a result of connections. I say to young people a lot, you know how people say, it's who you know? You will have heard that? Is everybody woke? Are you with me here? You've heard that, right? Yeah. Okay, so it's not. It's who knows you.
That's a twist. That's a twist. I
It
love
is.
it.
It's who knows you. How many of you know Spike Lee? I mean, you all know who, everybody knows Spike Lee, right? How many of you does Spike Lee know? Right. So it's about getting people to know you.
But you did it with excellence, integrity, doing good work. I have a saying, you don't want to be a gatekeeper, you want to be a door opener. And you have been a door opener for so many people in a world of gatekeepers. Let's talk about one of your most well-known mentees. How about Robert Townsend? And how did you all connect? And, you know, your connection remains to this day.
Yes, Robert, for you that don't know, Robert wrote the foreword for the book. When Robert was still in high school, he came to audition for me for a play that I was doing, and he was terrible. Now, he tells his story, so I'm not making this up. It was a terrible audition. And I had really dismissed him from being part of the cast, and as I was leaving, I heard these voices. Yul Brynner, all of these crazy cartoon voices. And it was him. And I said, so what are you doing? He said, well, I do things. I do voices and characters. So I said, well, let me see a couple. And so he performed. I'm going, well, why didn't you do any of that in the audition? So I cast him in the movie. In the play. Then I cast him in his first film, which was Cooley High. And I cast him in, I think, Mahogany. I cast him in his first commercial, which was a Pepsi commercial. And then when he went to college, I went up to... he was in Paterson, New Jersey. I went up to help him direct his first play. And so, yes, we've stayed connected all these years. We've worked together off and on, but I've never expected anything from him. You know, what I have given and what I give freely, you know, because Masekwa does remind me periodically that those are billable hours, and so I appreciate that. But in general, I think helping people is not, if it's not painful for you, then you really should be able to do it. So I try to refer people when I think that they're right for whatever, you know, I think that they should be doing. When I went to Nigeria to do 93 days, we took a filmmaker from here. You know, on every project that we do, we try to include young people.
I know that your creativity, generosity is legendary. I know that your partnership with Masekwa is legendary. I don't think people realize that what you see, this curiosity, this interest, he will talk to an 8-year-old, a 20-year-old, a 70-year-old. It's the same energy that you bring to all of it. And I'm just, you know, so appreciative of that.
But you know, Sylvia, I think that most people don't give enough credence to the capacity of young people.
That's right.
And a lot of young people, you know, they can be leaders, they are leaders, they have good ideas, they are talented. Sometimes all you have to do is allow them a place to grow and open up the thought to challenge them. But it's not about keeping them from doing what they want to do. You see creative people and you say, there's one, you know.
Yep.
That one can make it with a little help.
I see some of them in the room, and we're going to come to you for your questions in just a little bit. But the opportunity to be in the presence of someone who has had an impact that is global is nothing to ignore. And there's so much in the book. If you don't have a copy, you have to read it. It's personal, it's personable, and it's true. And something really hit me on the way here. As you mentioned, I brought my granddaughter with me, and I told her, I forgot you all had met before. Grandma forgot. But I, mentioned we're gonna meet this person, and I was really thinking of you, the you that's the author and that I was about to speak with. And then she said, and he's alive? We put so much credence on folks who are no longer here, and also on Black tragedy. The folks who were here and are gone, assassinated, left behind. And it is powerful to remember that there are stories that end in joy, that are rooted in love, that have generations and grandchildren that are not yet 5 and wanting to direct. And so I just, I'm grateful for that, and I encourage all of us to remember that we have to show that life, love, success exists right now. And can I ask you one very quick thing?
Sure.
I want to remind you, you talked about the importance, and you made me start doing it, of writing dates and, documenting. How did you, when you were ready to write your book, and I want the students in all ages to think about this, it wasn't easy, because I remember every time I talked to you, I'm working on my book, but you had resources or research material. Talk about that.
I'm a keeper. I'm not a hoarder, but I am a keeper. So I have every resume that I've ever written, from the very first one. That gave me timing. That gave me dates. It gave me experiences that I had not even remembered, to be able to compile that. And so I had that. I had photographs. When we lived in LA and we lived in Phoenix, and we spent time in New York, but we always said that we would keep our photographs, our music, and our photographs, music, and then there's one other thing, and important documents. But we would try to keep those. And so I was able to go back through my files and date check myself to be able to do that. And what I was talking about with Sylvia is that there were times when I would look at something and it didn't have a year on it, because a lot of the flyers that we were doing would say October 3rd, and people still do that today. They don't put the year because you know what year it is, right? But we should. Because 10, 20 years from now, you're going to look at this thing and say, oh, I wonder when that was. Someone sent me 2 pictures today. I produced a concert in L.A. With Robert Townsend in 90-something, and one with Nancy Wilson. And this gentleman sent me the flyers, the programs, this morning. He was the tech director on the show. And I would, it'll go into my files. I would keep them. So I have photographs from the period. When I opened up the La Mazzino Theater, for example, in '73, I did a book that first year, just documenting all of the plays we had done, the people that had worked with us, the direction in which we were going, the classes that we were offering. And all of that became helpful in being able to build this. The other thing is I have a great memory, and I have for some time. And so I wanted to make sure that I was able to pull up the names of people that needed to be remembered. Because the book is not just about me, it's about a period in which a number of people made incredible contributions that folks should know.
Can you talk a little bit about that period, that renaissance, the Black arts movement, that sense of cultural pride? What made that period of, I don't know, after the 60s or late 60s, 70s, what made that so special?
Let's look at the 50s for a minute and the condition in which black people found themselves. We were still being lynched. Emmett Till was killed in the 1950s. Rosa Parks was put off the bus. That was the 50s, right? During that period of time, during the 50s, black men or black women couldn't look white people in the eye. If we were driving down the street, we couldn't pass Michelle Alexander, this is from her book, you couldn't drive past a white person in a car because you would be stopped. If they were going too slow, if they were going too fast, you couldn't pass them. There were periods of time where we couldn't eat vanilla ice cream. Isn't that sick? But it's true. There were laughing barrels in St. Louis, where if you were walking down the street and you found something funny, you were black, you had to stick your head in the barrel so that white people wouldn't think that you were laughing at them. That was the 50s. Going into the 60s, after the death of Malcolm, everything changed. People began to look at ourselves with pride. Black power became an anthem. Singers began to sing about it. Artists began to draw about it. Teachers began to demand their ability to teach about it. And it became a period where we were more interested in the group's success than the individual success. We found our hair again. Do you know there was 300 years when we didn't have a comb in this country? Isn't that something? I mean, just think about that. That you couldn't do anything related to the ability to find a way to feel good about yourself. And parts of this country is trying to get back to that. You cannot allow history to be erased. Now, we have an obligation to tell our own history. We have an obligation to make sure that our communities are fed and nurtured with that which will make them feel good about themselves. But that does not eliminate the need for institutions to tell truth about history. So if you're not going to tell truth, then don't teach it at all. Eliminate all the lies. Take it out the course.
Because the context is so important.
It is.
So you got us to the 60s, keep going, 60s, 70s, and that, the writers, the poets, Oscar. Talk about that a bit.
And so let's talk about some levels of destruction, some things that moved us in the opposite direction. So, for example, during that period of time, black institutions were all over the city. There were tons of them, places where you could go to learn almost everything about yourselves. If I just want to step back for a minute. So in the 1940s, the Southside Community Arts Center opened. It's the oldest African-American arts center in America. And one of the things that happened during that period was that the artists that were teaching at the Art Institute would come back to the Southside Community Arts Center on the weekends, and they would teach for free what they had learned. At the Communiversity, which is now the Jacob Carruthers Center, which is on Oakenwald, they had the Communiversity on the weekends. It was a community university where you could go, take free classes, and hear from all of these incredible speakers discourse. There's a statement in my book, it's a copy of a memo from Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI. And Hoover talks about how it's important to investigate black bookstores, find out what people are reading, find out who's coming there to speak, what kind of programs they're having, and in whatever case, try to put them out of business if you can. So in terms of theaters and arts programs, in the name of what do they call it when you have different audiences come in? Yeah, in the name of diversity, the funding agencies began to give money to the major institutions downtown and ignored the institutions that were on the South Side. So they couldn't get funding. So the one black play that was done downtown had to be it. So you see, there's a period where you have 17 black theater companies in Chicago, and it goes down and down and down because of the lack of support that they could get. And the other thing that rolled into that was the Jackie Robinson syndrome. You got black folks running down to Goodman because it's the first time that they had a black play and not going to ETA on the South Side. It's reality.
I think we're going to move to take some questions from the audience. Thank you so much again. There's so many places you could be tonight, but you're in the right place at the right time with the right folks. And so here we've got a mic on this side, a mic on that side.
They'll have to come over here.
Oh, okay.
Yes, if
I
you have any
imagined a
questions, you
mic
can come
over
up to
by
the
you.
mic. But you know what? I have some questions from online.
Okay, we'll
So
start
we
with
can
that
start
and then
here.
we'll, yes.
Question number one, do you think some of the tactics of nonviolence like student walkouts will work in Chicago today?
I personally don't believe that they will. When the walkouts and the marches started, it was a novelty for the country, and it got coverage. And so every major news outlet was there, and it evoked in people the fact that things were wrong, right? Well, now you don't get the same kind of coverage that you would do. So marching, I don't think, is as effective. If you do some level of boycott, if you shut something down, like the young man that's running for mayor, Jamal Green, he shut down Chase Banks, and Chase Bank turned around and said they're going to commit money to undo the wrongs. If you can do things that are more jarring, and I'm not talking about burning up nothing, I'm talking about things that in terms of strategy will force change, I think you're in a better position than just marching and at the end of that doing nothing. One other thing, voting. People have said, and I hear people say, that our people died for the right to vote. I am vehemently opposed to that concept. Our people died for freedom. Voting was a methodology to get to that freedom. And voting is never enough. If you're going to vote, you also have to hold the person that you're voting for accountable. It doesn't help if you just vote for them and then you don't get any services in your community. Or if they're doing things that are against what you truly believe in. So you just can't vote. You got to be calling your aldermen. You got to call the committeemen. You got to call the state senators. You have to participate in a different way.
And I just want to add around the nonviolence, I think that the young people that were involved with the Let Us Breathe movement made some change, and there is a Cartemquin film called Unapologetic, which documents that era, because Anita Alvarez was out because of young people. So it's jarring, but I think that they have power and they're ready to express it. Do you have another question for us?
Yes. Okay. So, next question. Why do you think there's still so much pushback towards embracing Black history in education, like what's happening in Florida?
I think part of the issue there is that people want to hide the reality of what history represents. And if you come from a family, for example, where your great-grandfather was a mass murderer, you might not want that to be advertised, but the reality is that it's part of your history. We cannot calm people by ignoring the fact that this country was built on the massacre of Native Americans, on the enslavement of Africans, on the persecution of Chinese when they were here on the railroad. You go on and on and on. But the only way that we can move forward is if we recognize the ills of the past and say, we're not going to let it happen again. I don't care if it was my mama, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, they were wrong for that. And if you look at history, there were people that said, this is wrong. The abolitionists said, this is just unacceptable. So let's step up and do something that's going to make a difference. And we have to continue that today. Those of you that are students, if you can organize a party, 200 people, you can organize a group to stand up for something that you can believe in. And you should do a combination of both.
And I know that the Envisioning Justice, that the series here at the library is going to have even more of that. I think Helen Schiller is going to be here next month, who was an ally of the Black Panthers and, stood up to oppression. Hi, what's your question?
Good evening. First, I want to thank you for your encouragement. My question is, as far as culture and history is concerned, would you say that to forget history is to repeat history, but even more than that, he who forgets history is destined to become extinct?
Yes, I totally agree with you that history is the only thing that allows us the benefit of watching our back. because if you understand the path that you've been on and what people have done, then you might be able to stand up and deal with it. But there's another level of truth that we need to get to in terms of history. Most of you that know anything about the Black Panther Party, a lot of what is dealt with them is them standing in Oakland with the guns, right? That's the image that we always see. But free breakfast program was them. You know, neighborhood clinics, that was the Panthers that were doing that. The first health food store, Fatonia's Health Foods, was on 63rd Street. So not only do we have to understand the bad about history, but we have to also understand the good. We have to realize that these people made these contributions. We cannot name enough women because we don't cover enough of them. We have to cover more of the Fannie Lou Hamers and the Ella Bakers and the Dorothy Heights and Ella, gosh, her name just went out of my brain. She was from the West Side here. Nancy Jefferson.
Nancy Jefferson, Willie Barrow. We could name them all.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we need to do more. So if any of you all are filmmakers or storytellers or writers, you have still a lot that you can write on because our history has still not been covered in the way that it should.
Well, I'd like to move us towards our wrap-up so folks can get to meet you up close. And again, thank the library, thank you. It's been a journey, and it continues because there's more folks who want to hear what you have to say. And please read the book and read it with a young person. There's also some fun aspects here. People, you all knew Shaka Khan before she was Shaka Khan.
That's right.
So there's some history about people that you may have heard of that you'll want to know. But what do you want people to take away from your book and from your story?
In the beginning, you mentioned my quote about what makes a person's contributions important. And most of us, I think, as you look at my book, I would like you to recognize that there are things in your family and there are people in your family that should be celebrated. Not because they led a march, but because they sustained the family, because they sustained the neighborhood, because they participated in the PTA, because they were committee men and worked, for Harold Washington, because there was a lady named Miss Wright. I wish I knew where she was. Miss Wright was like, I believe, the first neighborhood watch. She was a lady, she had 13 kids. She lived on the first floor of Stateway Gardens. You couldn't get away with nothing. Miss Wright knew everybody's mama, everybody's father. She knew who we all belonged to. And if we did anything, she would get on us. That's a person that has done great things, because she kept us in order. And so what I want people to do as they read the book is realize that you have stories to tell, that these are my memories. These are the people that I have worked with, and there are hundreds of them that I didn't. That I was on the periphery of, that are within your grasp to be able to tell those stories. I try to end my comments with an African folktale, and it's called Father the Son. It's Daddy is talking to the son, and the son says, Daddy, you tell me that the lion is the king of the jungle, yet in every book I read, the man always kills the lion. Daddy, why is that so? So the father turns to his son and says, until the lion learns to write, the story will always end the same. We, as a collective, have an obligation to tell our family histories. It's also important so that you don't marry your cousin, because we need to know the connections of the people that are around us. And it's great now to see everybody going out to get their DNA checked, That was our thing, but now it's gone on down someplace else. But in the process, if you can just try to keep up with the two sides of the family so that every generation, even if it just starts with 2 generations off, they know who their grandparents are and their great-grandparents, so that they know who their cousins are and who they're related to. We can begin to rebuild our connections to family if we talk about it. We did a program at the DuSable Museum, and it was a program where they were talking about family albums, and someone brought a baptismal record, and they projected it on the screen, and Dr. Carol Adams, who was the president of the museum at the time, saw on the bottom of it her either mother or grandmother's name and realized that this woman was her cousin. They never knew it until they saw those documents. So documents are important. And it's important that you tell the story. You know, people say that you know, there's always have to be somebody left so somebody can tell the story. There are filmmakers, there are storytellers, there are writers, there are singers. We have an obligation to continue to tell those stories. Final comment on that. If you have a time capsule and you put in that time capsule what you've written or what you've created, would you want your great-great-great-grandchildren to see it? Would you want them to see that part that you played? Would you want them to hear that song that you made today? Because it's going to be around a long time after you're gone. And so you have to be concerned about what you create and what you leave to the world, because it's going to be around.
Well, that's that new measure of success, the folks that you have helped and the doors that you've opened. 2 quotes from you. Education can be a tool of oppression or freedom. Pemon Rami. I liked what you said about young people today. That's a quote we'll keep. And you also say, we must examine our past in order to reflect and demonstrate the ancient and contemporary cultural traditions which shed light on the dignity of our people, community, and culture. You are a light bringer, a culture acknowledger, and a path maker. I'm so honored to be your friend, and I thank you for all that you have done. How about a round of applause for Pemon Rami?
Thank you, Sylvia.
So business stuff is happening. Some people are gonna have to go home and do homework maybe, I'm not sure. But thank you so much for your time. Can you give a round of applause for the People's House, the Chicago Public Library, and Harold Washington's library? And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the passing this week of Josie Childs, who was the founder of the Harold Washington Legacy Committee. We had many programs in this building, and thanks to her and that committee, his legacy continues. So thank you for all that you do, and the commissioner as well. Thank you.
Thank you.